I'm Anne-Marie Pierce with Thurston County, and I'll be moderating today's session, Why Fertilize? Understanding Behaviors to Reduce Pollution, which is presented by Karen Dubose from Skagit County. This presentation has been pre-recorded. Our presenter is with us though, and if you will type questions into the Q&A box, which is found actually below at the bottom of your screen, the chat box, then at the end of the presentation, I will be sharing questions that you type into the chat box with Karen so she can answer them for us. And with that, we will start our pre-recorded presentation.
Hi, I'm Karen Dubose, Skagit County's Pollution Identification and Correction Coordinator, here from Skagit County. So as you all know, social marketing is one of the requirements of the Phase 2 NPDES permit. And a common mistake for people is jumping right into designing a project, assuming that we know our audience and why they do the things that they do. But if there's anything that I've learned in the projects I've worked on, it's that we in the stormwater world are not average humans. And so it's really important to stop and ask ourselves some important questions about our audience and what will help in designing an effective program. You're looking at a photo here of Big Lake. Yes, we have very clever names here in Skagit County. It's east of Mount Vernon, and it's a shallow lake surrounded by about 700 homes, everything from large McMansions to old cabins that have been converted to full-time homes. Over the last few years in Skagit County, we've had some toxic algae blooms in the lake. And with its history of toxic algae blooms and aquatic weeds, we thought it might be an ideal location to consider a yard care program. I will say right now that we are pretty sure that the nutrient situation in Big Lake is much more complex than yard care and fertilizer, but this seems like a really good place to start. So for a first step, it's pretty important to know what kinds of yard care people are doing and why. So after combing through the existing research, we did a survey of about 700 residences in the Big Lake watershed to see if our residents' attitudes matched what the research says. So I found 6 really good studies about fertilizing behaviors. They ranged in geography from the East Coast to Minneapolis, St. Paul, San Francisco, Nashville, and Southern Australia. They all had slightly different angles, but they generally showed similar results. We based much of our survey off of those studies. And as I go through the presentation, I'll talk about what those studies showed and what we found in comparison. So all the studies point to this as a major factor in why people fertilize their lawns. I do it because it's a way to show I'm a good member of the community. It's a way to fulfill expectations about what it means to be a positive member of the community. That might be codified into a homeowners association set of rules or not, but it's a way to communicate a willingness to cooperate in maintaining shared space and get approval from their neighbors. So we asked several questions around why people fertilize. And as you can see here on the left, people who fertilize definitely feel stronger than those who don't, that the quality of their lawn reflects positively on them as a resident. So that agrees with previous studies. We also wanted to know whether fertilizing was a choice or a requirement in the neighborhood. There are just a few very small homeowners associations in the area, so there's almost no written expectations of how a yard should be kept. As you can see here, people don't seem to feel much social pressure from their neighbors to keep a tidy yard. 90% of people said that there are no or not very strict expectations for yard maintenance. When we asked whether their neighbors expected them to fertilize, 86% said no. So combined with the previous slide, it seems like in the Big Lake area, fertilizing is an internal choice related to being a good neighbor than some sort of peer pressure to keep their yards nice. So going back to those previous studies, other common reasons found in the literature for fertilizing is because they want a lush green lawn, or they want their lawn to be healthy and they believe fertilizer is going to do the trick. Many people believe that the quality of their lawn affects their property values. So again, going back to Big Lake, the vast majority of people who fertilize said that it was at least somewhat important for them to have a lush green lawn. Of those who don't fertilize, half don't think it's important at all. So those who are fertilizing are doing it at least in part because they want a nice green lawn. So we also asked, in case we were missing something with the questions that we were asking, we asked an open-ended question. So we let them say whatever they wanted about why they fertilize their lawns. The majority of people made some comment about keeping it healthy, so that matches really nicely with the research. Weed management was the next most common response, and several people said flat out just that they want a green lawn. So we also asked whether the quality of their lawn affects the value of their home. The majority of people said that the lawn has at least some impact on the value of their home. There was no significant difference here between fertilizers and non-fertilizers, and that was an interesting detail. But so far, this tells us that Big Lake residents are just like their peers from other studies. So going back to those studies, we read that the presence of kids and pets in the household doesn't seem to matter when it comes to why people fertilize. And that was true here in Big Lake too. Many people struggle to see how fertilizing their lawn can affect water quality, especially when their property is small and they think they're using fertilizer correctly. And I can guarantee you that just about everyone is positive that they're using fertilizer correctly. Last but not least, the other studies found that people tended to believe that stormwater is treated. So anything coming off of their property doesn't matter. And that's the one place where our survey in Big Lake was different than everyone else. Most people in Big Lake already know that the stormwater is not treated and goes directly into the lake. So let's talk for a minute about what people are actually doing out in the Big Lake area right now. We asked, because we wanted to know, you want to know who you're talking to. So how many people are fertilizing? If nobody fertilizes, then you don't need to do this campaign. And if they do, but they use a landscape service, then maybe we shouldn't be talking to them. Maybe we should be talking to the landscape service. So in our study, we asked how many people are fertilizing and do they use a lawn care service? And in our study, about half of people did not fertilize their lawns, but the other half do use fertilizer. And so we still have a pretty solid audience. Also note here that 4% of people use a landscaping service. So there's not much point in working with landscaping services because that would be a very small audience. So the next thing to know is when people are using fertilizer and how often they use it. As you can see here, spring is the most dominant time that people are fertilizing. Most people are out there fertilizing in spring. And if they do, they tend to only fertilize once during that season. You can see that there are a couple of people over here in the more than 4 times that fertilize quite frequently, but they're in the minority. So we should focus on people who, are in the majority. So we'll skip those people for now. And then what fertilizer do they use? It will surprise probably no one that Weed and Feed is the most frequently cited type of fertilizer that they used when we asked. A few people said they always use organic, but they were in the minority, and a few others listed moss control products or lime rather than a fertilizer as what they used. Of course, another thing that's really important to know is where they get their fertilizer. That's going to help us, if we're advertising, is there some place that we need to advertise more than other places? The usual big box stores are clearly a good target, but we'd miss a large portion of folks if we focused only on Lowe's and Home Depot. If we decide to advertise in stores, we're going to have to work with 6 or more different stores, and that's going to be a challenge for our program. We only have 2 staff members in our entire stormwater program. So we might not be able to get to all of those stores. So that's an extra consideration for us. So let's talk for a minute about barriers to adopting natural yard care practices. What's stopping people from doing it? There are a ton of possible barriers in the literature, and you really need to do your own research to figure out what your specific community's barriers are. I've pulled out a couple of what I think from the research are the most important. The first barrier is habits. I always fertilize in spring and I always use this product and it's always worked fine. Why should I change? Why should I do anything different? So that's a pretty big barrier. Habits are pretty hard to break sometimes. Related to that is messaging. Fertilizer companies have entire marketing teams that have told us that our lawns need to be fertilized in the spring and the fall, and it'll be terrible if we don't. So that's what people do. And if your message is going to be different than that, you'd better have a really good reason and some facts to back it up. Another really important barrier is, everybody is absolutely sure, and we've just talked about this before, everybody's so sure that they never over-fertilize. And, I got to be honest, I'm sure I don't over-fertilize my lawn, but I don't measure out the square footage of my lawn. I'm not weighing out the fertilizer that I'm using. And most fertilizers, the bag, you read the instructions and it says a certain number of pounds per square footage. I don't even do a soil test on my lawn. I'm going to admit it. But if you tell me I'm over fertilizing, I'm going to bristle. And so, I may not object if you change that message. I may not object to just using less fertilizer. So that's a message that might get us to our goal too. And it's a message that we should consider. And last but not least, everybody wants to point to everybody else as the problem. So if you have a golf course or a farm or some other source of nutrients around, you better be sure you're addressing that too and have the data to back you up that everybody is the source and not just, this person. So this is one that just seems really important to say. Social marketing is all about starting with the behaviors that have the lowest barriers to adoption. If your campaign doesn't offer effective and time-convenient alternatives, things that are going to work and don't take a whole lot of extra time, it's not going to succeed with people who value their time and the appearance of their lawn. We've already shown that our audience values the appearance of their lawn, and who doesn't value their time? So we're going to really need to keep this in mind. So opportunities is our next subject. Anything that makes it easier for people to adopt a behavior. This could be financial incentives. This could be assistance doing the behavior, reminders, those sorts of things. So when you look at the research, a bunch of the research says that people, if they are concerned about water quality, they'll use fewer chemicals. Others show the exact opposite, that people continue to use chemicals, even though they're concerned about water quality. So here in Big Lake, we asked about concern over water quality. And separately, we asked about concern over toxic algae blooms, just to see if one might be stronger influence than the other. People were equally worried about water quality and toxic algae blooms, and that correlated well with fewer chemicals, for people using fewer chemicals. So that might be a tactic we want to use. One other thing that popped up in the comments to the survey, and this is a reason to always allow for comments somewhere in your survey, people are very concerned about weeds, aquatic weeds in the lake, weeds that could be fed by fertilizer running off of lawns. And that's an opportunity for an argument that might work for us. It's actually an argument that we did end up using. We asked a couple of questions about how difficult it would be to switch to a variety of natural yard care practices, and how willing they would be to try those practices. These included grass cycling, switching to organic fertilizer, spreading compost on the lawn instead of fertilizer, spot treating for weeds, and reducing lawn size. The two things that stood out in both questions as being both something that people were not currently doing, that they rated as easy to do, and also that they were willing to try, were switching to an organic fertilizer and fertilizing only in the fall. The second one might need a little explanation because it's not a common recommendation. Our lake is pretty shallow and its retention time is relatively short, on the order of a couple of weeks to a couple of months. So if our target is reducing the presence of summer algae blooms and lake weeds, spring is the season that we really need to focus on for fertilizer campaigns. Any fertilizer that's getting into the lake in the fall should have flushed out by the time that algae and weeds are a concern again. So next we have, we asked people what would make them more willing to try a behavior. It was an open-ended question. And so that could take maybe the form of coupons, free samples, or even showing how a practice maybe just reduces their cost out of pocket. And what was mentioned most frequently is the ease of getting and using the product. Which fertilizers are best? Which are the right ones for them to ess? And are they easy to find and easy to use? You know, if you're going to recommend a liquid fertilizer, that can be a lot harder to use than a granular fertilizer. So kind of thinking about those things. Several people mentioned that just helping them understand how different lawn care practices affect the lake and how practices that we're promoting make a healthy lawn would be enough for them. So it's possible that just giving them more information works. We discussed this already from the research, but several folks noted that if it's going to take more time, they're not likely to do it. And for a couple of people, just having the equipment to do what we recommend might be a barrier. And so we need to make sure that they have the equipment to do what we're asking. So if that's a mulching lawnmower or something like that, we need to take that into consideration. Finally, it's important to know who the best messengers are for information. So we asked them who they trusted for information about lawn care. About 80 to 90% of people trusted the Washington State University Extension, Master Gardeners, and the local conservation district, with the local conservation district on the lower end of that scale. Then there was a really clear break in the data, and about 35% of people, plus or minus, trusted local garden stores, landscaping companies, and family. And least trusted were friends and neighbors. We didn't ask about friends and neighbors with nice gardens versus friends and neighbors with average yards. So take that last one with a grain of salt. My personal experience is that you get a lot more questions if you have a nice garden. People want to know what you're doing to make it that way. So that about covers the survey itself that we did. But I wanted to give you a sneak peek about the direction that we chose to go. And who knows, maybe next year at Municon we'll present how it worked. We chose the behavior of skipping the spring fertilizer as the behavior that we wanted to promote. But yard care practices are pretty hard to separate from each other. And so we've included grass cycling and soil testing as in our recommendations on the website because we figured people are going to have some questions. You know, okay, I'll skip the spring fertilizer, but how do I still make sure that my lawn is green and all the things? So we included that, that information along with some information about choosing the right fertilizers. In our work on fecal coliform issues, we found that everybody cares about water quality. Everybody will say that they care about water quality, but very few people care enough about water quality to have the water quality itself be the driver to change. And so instead of focusing on algae blooms or something like that, we focused on protecting what people love about living near the lake: swimming, boating, fishing, all those activities. Skipping the spring fertilizer also handily gives them more time to do those things. So instead of fertilizing, they're out, you know, boating or taking a nap or, you know, doing something else that's fun. So we're definitely shooting for taking the angle, and you can see here in the picture of having more fun and protecting what we love than focusing on icky looking algae blooms and lake weeds and all the nasty things, because you're more likely to want to protect what you care about than worry about bad things. So I should note that we did not come up with the protect fun angle all on our own. We are modeling our campaign off of the early years of the Be Floridian campaign. And that was the only campaign that I found in all of my research that had demonstrated success in the yard care social marketing realm, specifically for using less fertilizer during certain seasons. So we feel like this is a pretty good way to go. We'll see. We'll find out next year, I guess. So far, so good. So with that, if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. If you'd like any copies of our research or the survey report or anything else, feel free to send me an email. I'm always available. If you'd like to see the website that goes with the campaign, you can check it out at skagitcounty.net/stormwater. There's a big blue Protect Fun button. Go ahead and click that, and that'll take you to the website that we created. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you, Karen, for that very informative presentation there. So it looks like we do have a question. Are the fertilizers that you recommend available for purchase in the fall? And which types of fertilizers are you recommending?
That's a great question. So at this point, we haven't gone, so I would not call this a fully developed campaign yet. We're kind of going season by season and seeing how things progress. So in the fall, or more likely in the summer, we'll start talking about what fertilizers are available. At this point, we haven't chosen to recommend specific fertilizers. What we're trying to do is educate people on, and you'll see if you go to the website, trying to educate people on how to choose their own fertilizers. So focusing on low or no phosphorus fertilizers versus, just getting a fertilizer. We talked about, do we promote organic fertilizers versus a synthetic fertilizer, because we're all tree huggers and organic is the way that, we automatically maybe want to go. But organic fertilizers tend to have phosphorus in them, and we didn't want to shame anyone for preferring a synthetic fertilizer. So we chose to more educating them on what those numbers mean on the bag and soil testing and what your soil test is going to tell you, those sorts of things.
Thank you. So we have another question here. A great time to reach folks for behavior change is when they recently moved. Their county, I think it's King County, has had 50% growth in population in the last 10 years. Have these groups been part of your research and outreach?
Not yet. So we're focused on right now the Big Lake area. It's a little difficult with our the way our county keeps track of records to figure out who's properties that have changed recently. So at this point we haven't. I do want to start talking with some realtors and getting that kind of information down the line. A lot of these folks have been living here. So this is a big retirement community too. And so these are folks who have been living here for quite some time. There's always turnover, but there's not as much turnover, say, as in the neighborhood where I live, where like 10% of the houses sell every year. So yeah, that's kind of down the road. We're taking this step by step.
And during this time of COVID-19, where we're not gathering in large groups and things like that, what are your outreach methods that you've been using that you've found effective so far? Oh boy, so this has been a struggle. I got to say, it's really been a struggle. Trying to figure out what to do. So we automatically, I would love to throw an event in the big, because this is a very specific community. And I can we have a Skagit County Clean Water Facebook page. The larger county has a Twitter account and all of those things, but none of those things target this particular neighborhood. And so instead of, throwing an event or knocking on doors, what we've chosen to do is a round of 3 postcards that you saw the front of one of them in that second to last slide.
So we've got postcards. There is a Big Lake community Facebook group that I was able to join and that I've been able to do. I'm trying not to spam them with like weekly posts, but kind of, a couple of posts. We're also putting information on the Big Lake Next Door group. So we have a group of, if anybody's used the Nextdoor app, we can kind of target neighborhoods. And so I gotta say, of all of that, I am able to track with Google Analytics who's hitting the websites, how they're getting there. We found that QR codes on the postcard are not effective at all to get people there. It seems like most people are just typing in the websites, and that just could be a factor of the age of the community. I mean, I'm not a big QR code person. Facebook, the Facebook group has been the most successful at driving people to the campaign page. And Nextdoor, I struggle with Nextdoor. Sometimes I get really good results and sometimes I don't. And when I get good results, it's usually when I'm trying to, target the whole county instead of a specific neighborhood.
Thank you. Let's see, we have a couple more questions here. One is not a technical question, but where did you find all those water-related Lego minifigures?
I want a set of Legos so bad. I want a set of Legos. I have this like little plan that one day I'm going to get a set of Legos and do this, but Shutterstock actually has a surprising collection. If you just are, looking for Legos, Shutterstock, or I've gotten some of them. I have an Adobe Spark account is for a lot of the work that I do, and that's the webpage that we created. I actually created on Adobe Spark because our county's website is terrible and I can't do whatever I want. So I can do whatever I want on Adobe Spark. So I've got some of those from there.
Thank you for sharing those resources. Are you coordinating with WSU and Master Gardener programs to keep your messaging consistent? And second two-part question is, in the future, do you think you will have any luck moving people to use compost for top dressing only?
Those are good questions. So Washington State University and the Master Gardeners program, we're partly limited by funding, and they are going to very much, jingling from the dog. They are much going to want a little bit of financial resources to kind of help them move along. They're happy to join. They just need to be able to pay for their staff time to do that. So I think that we're communicating with them. There's a Shore Stewards program that I'm talking with, and we're talking about making our messages consistent. But at this point, we're not the way I want to be. I want to, be a really coordinated community or outreach, I guess. And in the future, compost for top dressing only that's a hard one, because compost is hard to apply if you have a big piece of property. If you have a tiny little yard, like I have like a shoebox of a lawn, and that's super easy. I do compost only, no problem. My neighbors think I'm crazy, but my lawn looks better. So I don't know. That's one of those things where there's some significant barriers to actually acquiring the compost. You have to have a truck, or you have to pay for delivery to get it there. And you have to have the wheelbarrow to do the things, you're not just running out there with your spreader and walking back and forth a little bit. So I think that's going to be a harder sell.
Okay, thank you. So we have two more questions. We have 1 minute to go here. Well, one actually is just a comment from one of our participants that direct mailers have worked really well for them during COVID-19. And then the question we have here is, are there any studies about stormwater impact differences between applying fertilizer during the wet season or dry season? Assuming if you're thinking like before the fall versus in the spring.
Yeah, so right now we are actually doing a little bit of water quality monitoring. So the lake itself is really big and isn't going to show much of a signal, but we have some little tributaries that run down that we're doing some water quality monitoring as our project continues. So we don't have any existing studies, but we are kind of working on that right now.
Wonderful. So we are just about out of time. There was one more question about how you're communicating with golf courses and parks in the county, but we're under a minute. So I don't know if you can answer that pretty quickly.
I can go quick. There's one golf course and they don't use fertilizer. So it's a very natural golf course. And in this area is pretty small and there really aren't any parks. So we're not.
You're not. All right. Well, on that note, thank you very much. If anyone has additional questions for Karen, then you can send those questions directly to her via email. And we just want to thank Karen very much for sharing with us on the why fertilize, understanding behaviors to reduce pollution. And again, like I said, if you have any additional questions, you can contact Karen directly. Thank you, everyone. We hope you enjoy the rest of Municon 2021.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.